please do say what you believe. Do not be afraid to speak. Do not be afraid how your speech will be received. Just make sure that you're sharing what you truly believe and that you're doing so in parliamentary fashion by addressing the chair. And with that, I will call this debate to order. On the topic, resolved, religious adoption agencies should not be required to allow LGBT couples to adopt children. Is there a first docketed speech in the affirmative? A speech from Gary Kirkland, perhaps?
Myself. Okay. Yes, I want to speak in the affirmative.
All right,
Can you
please
hear?
go ahead. Yes.
Okay. My position is that private charities or adoption agencies should have the right to adopt to whomever they want for whatever reason they want, especially if they're a religious organization. Our First Amendment gives the right to free exercise of religion, and therefore they should have a right to do that. I understand also there are people, excuse me, sorry, there are people of different colors who don't want people to adopt people of other colors. Example is I've heard there are some black people who don't want whites to adopt blacks. Well, they should ever rewrite that. There may be some whites who don't want blacks to adopt whites. As a private organization, people should have the right to decide whatever rules they want, and those who don't like it can go to a different agency and adopt somewhere else. And that's part of freedom in a country and part of freedom of religion. And that's my position. Thank you.
All right, jazz hands for our first speaker. Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Kirkland? Any questions? Is there a question from Cindy Pullman? I hope I'm getting your name right.
I'll take my hand down. I'm sorry, I want to speak. I made a mistake, so yeah.
Okay, not a problem.
I don't have a question. Thank you.
Of course. We'll take a question from Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that parents can go to different adoptive agencies, but the child is not able to make that same choice. If they're in an agency which would adopt them out, they may not have an ability to change to another agency that would get them the parents that they want. So, you know, how does the speaker feel about children not having a choice with getting a full range of parents that would be available to them?
Thank you. Mr. Kirkland, your response?
My response is the parents who put the kid in the adoption agency or whoever put them in there chose that agency to put their child. And maybe they knew or should know the rules of that agency. And also, if you're adopting a child, my position is if you can't get one child, you should get another and love them all and choose a child of any characteristics that you should be open to that. Anyone should be open to adopt. And if you can't have one child, you pick another. And like I said, the parents or whoever turned the child over to the adoption agency should have known the rules of that agency before they put that child into that adoption agency.
Gotcha. Further questions for the speaker? Please just raise your Zoom hand if you have any questions. All right, we'll take a question from Charlie Lindahl, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, you got the name right. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask the speaker, do you make a distinction between private organizations and private organizations that get public funding, and that's where discrimination laws come in and may affect whether that organization can be, if you will, regulated or required to allow LGBTQ adoptions. So it's really a question of how do you define the organizations, and would you exclude those, or would you require the organizations that do get public funding to have this requirement? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, being a libertarian, I don't believe government should be involved in funding these sort of organizations. That's what churches, the Atheists United, the temples, synagogues, Kiwanis Club, all those organizations should be the ones funding, not government. When you dance with the devil, you have to pay the devil's due. So if you accept government money, which I think is dancing with the devil, then you have to go by their rules. And so if they say you can't discriminate and you accept this money, you do that. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Hillsdale College. It's a totally different issue, but they got into that when they didn't want to tell what the race of their students were. The government demanded it. So the response Hillsdale did was say, we will not accept any government grants for students going there, where other organizations such as Stanford and other universities, they were accepting government loans, and so they had to dance with them. So that's my position. If you dance with the devil, like I said, if you're a government agency, then you have to do what the government tells you to do once you accept their money.
Thank you. And we'll take a question from Ron McFarland.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, could you ask Mr. Chair, could you ask the Speaker, could he distinguish between moral values and discrimination?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll address that. A discrimination and a moral value. Okay, I'll just this when I discriminate, when I decide to back to our original thing, if I don't want pineapple on my pizza, I'm discriminating against pineapple. When we go through life as an intelligent being, we discriminate all times on deciding. I used to tell my students, I was a teacher, would you marry the first thing that walked through the door? Whatever it was, whether it's a person, a tree, or a horse? If you don't marry that first thing that walks through the door, you're discriminating, and that's discriminating. Now, a moral value is, morals are the idea of what's good and evil. And I've studied ethics, and moral values are what you think is good and evil. And I define the good as I get what I want, and that's good. Evil is when I don't get what I want, or I get what I don't want. Now, I use, as a biologist, I use other animals to determine morality, or trees, because it makes it clearer and easier to understand, in my opinion. When a lion wants to eat a zebra, the good is the lion gets the zebra. The bad or the evil is the zebra gets away. Of course, the zebra has a different opinion on that one, so their morals disagree. A tree will kill its own babies if they drop too close to the mother. So their morality is, it's good for me, but it's not good for my babies. So morality is deciding. Now, a group morality is when a group of organisms, say humans, decide on something that's good or evil. And their laws are a reflection of the moral values of the politically powerful or the majority, depending on how a group decides. And so the minority has to think, well, I guess what I'm doing is evil because the majority says it's evil. And that's where laws come from. So laws are a reflection of morality, deciding what's good and what's evil. I hope I've addressed your question.
Well, thank you. More on the religious, what I was looking for.
Oh, a religion is, okay, sure, I'll address it from a religion is putting one's morals into practice. That's what I define religion as. You put your religious values into practice. I've studied cannibals and headhunters. I used to live with headhunters. Their religion was, the good was you cut somebody's head off if it's your enemy, and hang them on the door, which I saw. Evil is when he cuts your head off and hangs it on the door. And their religion was headhunting or cannibals. Other religions have other values. And when I was living with the headhunters, the Seventh-day Adventists and the Catholics had missionaries there who were trying to change their religions and their moral values. But again, what I'm saying is religion is putting one's morals into practice. That's what religion is. Okay? I hope I addressed that in terms of religion.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkland. As a quick Zoom note, if you ask a question, please lower your Zoom hand. And then if you want to ask a follow-up, go ahead and raise your hand. Again, that way I can just make sure if we've addressed your question, or if you just, so I can track if I've called on the right person. We'll take one final question from Sue.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for the speaker, and my question is, with the agencies that you're working with, how many kids do not get adopted, and what do you do for those children so that they don't end up in sex trafficking, which a huge percentage do?
Okay, I guess that's addressed. I don't work with any adoption agency. I'm not involved with any adoption agency at all, so I can't answer your question. I have no idea. I know that I read Frederick Douglass, and I admire that man tremendously. And to somebody to tear his statue down is just beyond the pale. Frederick Douglass decided he wasn't going to be a slave. And he made that decision, and then he said, I am not going to be slave. Better to live free or die. And he was willing to die to not be a slave. So when you mention sex traffic, those people should gang up and get out of it, whatever way they can. Read about Frederick Douglass and how he did it. Thank you.
Well, thank you to our speaker and to our questioners. Let's give them some jazz hands. And now,
I don't expect any.
and now we will take a speech, a docketed speech in the negative. Is there a speech from Cindy?
Yes. Hello, my name is Cindy. I'm from Ohio. And I lost the coin toss. My husband and I, we only have one computer in the house, and I lost the coin toss. So I'm on the phone. So can you hear me okay? Great. Okay. So I am a not for the should not. So I look at myself as a positive. And the positive is, what do you want? You want to make children, have children go to families. And you want them to be safe and have a nurturing environment. And what is the difference between a heterosexual and a homosexual or whatever is just a matter of the environment when the child is a fetus. That is all that is due. There's no gene, there's nothing like that. So the only difference is the environment when they were babies. And that is, you know, who they are.
Thank you.
And so what, does that mean they're not good parents? Does that not mean that a child will not be loved and taken care of? And that is what the most important thing is that the child is loved. And my understanding is there's a lot of children out there that need a lot of good homes. And a home can take many different forms. And also, along the same lines, children and LGBTQ people there's no religion component to that. They're all religions, so you don't have to worry that their religion is going to be different from the organization that they're going to. So I believe that, you know, to put families, good families and children together, that the only requirement for deciding who should get a child is this a good, safe home?
Thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? My Zoom has frozen just a moment. If there's a question, Mackenzie, would you mind unmuting the questioner?
We'll have Jennifer Maxwell go. I think you need to unmute yourself, but feel free to go for it.
Awesome, thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd like to address the speaker's point about every child deserves a good home. I am in the affirmative in agreeing with that statement for sure. I think that I would like to explore a little bit more I would like this speaker to expand on her feelings of requiring a organization of any sort to violate their own charter, if they are Christian adoption or if they are a organization that has a charter that says that they will not work with LGBTQ people. Is it the state's authority, or is it the moral authority to require them to violate those charters? And then if the speaker also knows of any organizations that
Jennifer, could you quickly wrap up your question? And then if you'd like to ask a follow-up, raise your hand again. Thank you.
Thanks. So my question clearly is, can the speaker expand on why it is morally right to have a charter like go against their beliefs, whether it be an adoption agency or not?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question from the listener. And well, I believe that as I've lived my life, I know that I believe differently than a lot of people, but that doesn't make those people that they wouldn't be someone that I enjoy being with. So I can't understand, why somebody should be discriminated against just because of their sexual orientation. Even though the beliefs are different, I don't think there's anybody that you would run into that would have exactly the same beliefs as you.
Further questions for the speaker? All right, we'll take a question from Rachel Becker.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here. I also totally agree that children need safe homes at the end of the day. I think that's exactly right. However, I believe that many adoption agencies who have this kind of restriction question the ability of two people of the same gender to raise a child ideally. They believe that it requires a parent of each gender to raise a child in the best possible way because the child needs that diversity in their life. So I'm curious if the speaker has any thoughts about that.
I have seen people on so many different continuums in terms of compassion or nurturing or aggression or whatever you think are typical male or female characteristics. My son is going to get married to a man next month. And my son and the person he's marrying will make excellent parents. And my son is one of the most compassionate people I've ever met. I talk to him a lot. We're very, very close friends, as well as I'm being a parent and a child. And I just can see him being a great father. And I just think that, again, people are very, very different, as I know you've run across people. And so I think we have to stop stereotyping people as male and female. Yeah, if somebody, I mean, when it comes to things like even doing hair, males can do it. I mean, I've seen it on the YouTube. So anyways, I think that's how I feel.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to our speakers and our questioners. We are going to move on and take a speech in the affirmative. Is there a speech? Perhaps from Yuri? Yes, for a speech, Yuri Rabinowitz.
Thank you. Thank you to the chair. Thank everybody else who spoke. So I would like to argue on behalf, on the affirmative of this resolution. And I think if we take a look at our government, our system of government, the founders of our country were presented with an interesting problem. And the problem was that in Europe, basically, any and every society had, people would have certain ways to think about their religion. And then there was the government who had a different way of thinking about religion. And there was no way to bridge the gap between, the beliefs of the government and the beliefs of certain people in the society. And ultimately what ended up happening was that the government would crack down and either expel, kick out, kill, or force people, force the people that didn't believe like they believe to comply with the government's religion or belief system. So to solve that problem, as we all know, they adopted when establishing the Constitution of the United States, so they adopted a Bill of Rights. And the first, one of the previous speakers said, the first amendment in this Bill of Rights is that, and the solution to this age-old problem of sectarian violence was to say that that the government is not going to subscribe to a set of beliefs based on religion, right? That any laws that the government makes have to be based on on basically secular science and evidence, and evidence-based. It can't be. It's not just that the government can't say you can't kill because religion says that. No, there needs to be like a secular, evidence-based justification. They can't adopt a religious belief purely for religious reasons. But there are two parts of that. Number one, the government can't take the side of one religion versus the other. At the same time, the government, says we as a government have to stay out of people's beliefs, and we cannot force people or institutions to go against their beliefs. So there's two parts. There's the establishment clause, which is that the government can establish a religion, and then the freedom, the clause that says that that the government can't impinge on your beliefs, right? So I think for that fundamental reason, I think that there are two groups in our society. One group coming from a religious perspective, and again that's valid, just not for government. One group believes that there's an age-old tradition of a family, a nuclear family structure that has a man and woman, and and most naturally, often, not all the time, they're raising their own children, and that is the healthiest way to have a family, a family unit. There are others that believe that is not. Yes, it's been like that for a long time, but there's no reason it has to be like that. Two men, two women, different family situations can just as optimally and just as equally, raise a healthy family. Now, both of those beliefs, you could say, are valid to those who hold them. The question is, though, how do we coexist in one society with different groups that have these different beliefs. So the American solution was the First Amendment. The government says we're not going to get involved in that discussion. So when I'm talking about a group of, a group that does subscribe to the belief that, that homosexuality is not, should not be engaged in, and there are people that voluntarily are part of that group, and they believe that that's the family structure in which optimally children should grow up in. Government says, we can't fight against that. And at the same time, if on the other hand, if there's a group that does believe that homosexuality there's no difference and it's wonderful, and their families, a homosexual couple family would just as well raise their children in that environment. Government cannot, wouldn't be able to tell them on a religious basis that that they cannot have a family, right? So again,
Yuri, just letting you know you have about 30 seconds left, so feel free to unmute yourself and continue.
Thank you. So, but the reason I'm for this amendment is because this it errs on the side of government staying out of this debate, as opposed to government getting involved in this debate. So, and therefore, I believe government should not dictate to religious organizations that they that they must adopt, let homosexual couples adopt, just as I believe that government would should not force the homosexual organization, the LGBT organization, to force their children under their care to be adopted by a religious family that doesn't believe in LGBTQ rights in the same way.
Thank you to our speaker. Are there any questions? We'll take a question from Kathy Shapiro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the speaker's comments, and I think it's a tough issue, and I'd like the speaker to address where we would draw the line, where we would decide what is part of a religious belief, because within a religious group, there is variance. And so I'll give the extreme example, which may not have been so extreme sometimes, and I like that. Somebody owns a restaurant and that's their own business, or any business for that matter, and they've decided that another religion is evil, or another race or a race is evil in the name of their religion. And that's their belief, in the name of their religion. So they don't let anybody into their restaurant. And so I'll use the example of, let's say, I think the speaker and I are both Jewish. So let's say somebody decided that Jews are evil because of some historical thing, and this particular owner, in the name of religion, even if maybe other people in that religion don't agree. And I'm using that example, but it could be Muslim or African-American or whatever. And
Stuart, you're muted.
All right, technology. All right, we're good. Okay, it happens to us all. Sorry, Kathy, just letting you know, could you put a question mark in there somewhere, and then let the speaker respond. And also for everyone, if you find yourself asking a long question, you should give a speech.
okay. And did you hear the end of what I said before you interrupted, or do I need to repeat? Because the question is, I'd like the speaker to address that, where to draw the line, and like with that extreme example, where to draw the line. So
Perfect.
Okay.
So Chair, I'd like to thank the questioner for her question. And that is a question that that came up for me as I was thinking about the topic. So just just in a blatant example where it's I believe there are definite gray areas. For example, if if a religion would start up and part of their religion was that one needed to slaughter their firstborn child, I believe that, that's where the American government, would be able to say, if they would say, well, freedom of religion, the government can say, we can't dictate what you believe, but there are certain actions that we can dictate. There's certain actions that we can dictate. So then the question comes up, which is our question here, a question of discrimination. So, I wouldn't want, and this is me as the questioner had mentioned, we're both Jewish. I wouldn't necessarily want the government telling a Jewish adoption organization that they must allow a Jewish child to be raised in a Christian household. And I would also allow and would agree with if a Christian adoption organization would say, nothing personal, but these are Christian children. We don't want the children growing up in a Jewish household because that's not what we believe. And I believe the government should allow both of those to take place and should not get involved and force one or the other.
Thank you to our speaker and questioner. For the sake of time, we're going to move on to another speech. So is there a speech in the negative of the resolution? Raise your hands for a speech in the negative. I think there's one from Hank Fay. Do I have that correct? Hank Fay? Possibly
Yes.
for a speech?
Yes, Hank Fay. Yes, I'm from Berea, Kentucky. I've lived with a couple of women who are raising a child. My daughter is gay, is the best aunt, and actually she took over when my wife had an operation for a week and doing homeschool and everything else, and was incredible. But let's start with basics. Adoption is a civil, excuse me, this cat demands attention. Adoption is a civil procedure. And why is it a civil procedure? Why don't we just let people take whoever they want? And the answer is that the state has an interest in children getting the best experience they can being raised. It's in the interest of all of us that happens. The state represents not its own interest. The state represents the interest of all of us, ideally. Not that we always live up to our ideals. I mean, our ideals as a country is that, and indeed the very philosophical basis for our country existing is that every person is born with inalienable rights. And I think we fail to appreciate how important this is in terms of what we have missed in what we've done over the years. We have done a poor job of affirming the inalienable rights of so many people, and people of color, people of sexual orientation difference, and so forth. I mean, any kind of difference you can imagine, the folks who have disabilities. We've done a very poor job of affirming the basis on which we are different from the countries of Europe, another speaker mentioned. In the European countries of that time, everything belonged to the ruling class. In fact, in England to this day, all the land in England is owned by the king. People can lease it, and they have the ownership rights of the leasing, but the land itself is still owned by the king. What our founders said was that, and they based it on very sophisticated philosophy from European philosophers, and their letters show that they were aware of all of this, was that you had to say that and hold that everyone has those inalienable rights, or else the whole house of cards fell down, because as soon as you attempted to make a difference, you're allowing one human being to describe what the rights of another human being are. And so when it comes to adoption, if our interest is anything other than who are the best parents available, then we are denying those children's inalienable rights. Now, it's not a matter of belief. It's not a matter of belief who's going to be the best parents. Those things are to a degree measurable and they're knowable. And to the degree they're measurable and knowable, not on the basis of belief, on the basis of the social science that we have about this from a variety of factors, then that's who we are obligated to put that child with in order to uphold the very basis of our country, that every person, including that child to be adopted, has the inalienable right to the pursuit of happiness.
You have about 30 seconds left.
That. And so I would just say that let's remember that it is in the interest of all of us in our entire country, if we never let go of that principle that every person is born with inalienable rights, that government exists to keep our selfish impulses from infringing on other people's inalienable rights. And protecting those who have the least ability to self-protect their inalienable rights is a special obligation that we all have to each other. Every major religion in the world teaches that. We are to help the powerless and the poor. We are to have a preferential option for them. And so I think the proposition that a religious society or organization should have the right to not let LGBTQ parents adopt it contravenes the very basis of civil adoption and the very basis for the existence of our country.
All right, thank you. Questions for the speaker? Is there a question from Gary Kirkland?
I read the Declaration of Independence, and the speaker mentioned several times inalienable rights. And I want to ask him if he thinks Thomas Jefferson got it wrong, because really inalienable rights means rights one can't lose or somebody else can take away from one. And we've witnessed with Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, et al., that the only inalienable right that any person has, regardless of what government or anyone else says, is the right to die. Everything else is a privilege. The food you eat, the breath, the reason you have oxygen is because diatoms gave their all so that you could have oxygen to breathe. And so
cool.
My question is, what does the speaker think about what he used this term inalienable rights several times?
Yes, I appreciate the questioner's perspective. And that's an important, really important perspective to make a distinction about. What the philosophers who created this principle of inalienable rights, it wasn't created by Jefferson. It was created by a number of philosophers, one Polish and a couple of French, I believe. And the Polish actually had a Declaration of Independence 30 plus years before ours. It was probably more advanced than ours was, but that's a whole nother story. Inalienable rights means they are there whether they are tromped on or not. And that basis for inalienable rights really takes away the ability for power. Power cannot take away inalienable rights. When the World Bank decides that the poverty line for people is $1.50 a day, that doesn't make it okay. That just means it's what it is. So power will have its way, but inalienable rights exist independently of human action. And without that philosophical basis, we had no way to escape the authority of the king. And so that's the answer. I understand your perspective in terms of practical realities, and in terms of the philosophical basis of our country, that's also very clear. Both are very clear.
All right, we will take a final question. As a quick reminder, questions, answers, and speeches are all addressed to the chair. We'll take a quick question from Charles Danner, very briefly.
I'd like to know if Mr. Chair, I'd like to know if the speaker, for example, if I'm an unmarried Jewish woman and I have to give up my child for some reason, and I really, really want that child to be raised in a Jewish household, then I don't have that right.
I had a brief answer from the speaker.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the questioner means in terms of that person not having that right. I would need to know more about the circumstances. And there are certain things that happen when you give up a child, I guess. At that point you're saying, I am allowing society now to make decisions that are the best for this child. I'm giving up that ability to make decisions for that child. So that's the other side of it. Tough question, though.
All right, jazz hands for our speaker and our questioners. We will now move on to a speech in the affirmative. Are there any speeches in the affirmative? We'll take a speech from Erica and Bill.
That's just Erica.
Okay, Erica.
I wrote it out because I'm nervous. My two sons are adopted, so the issue of adoption in general has always been important to me. I also have absolutely no problem with same-sex marriage, same-sex relationships or marriage. I have a close family member who is in a same-sex marriage. It was always my belief that the responsibility of adoption agencies should be to find the best parents for a child, not to find a child for couples who want to adopt. Conventional wisdom used to be that children thrive best when they have both a mother and a father. There were studies after studies with tons of information on why this was the case. The conclusions always recounted what a father brought to the healthy emotional development of a son or a daughter. And there were equally important reasons listing all that a mother brought to the healthy emotional development. And the conclusion
all right, it seems like were we interrupted? I can't tell if that's just my computer.
No, can you hear me now?
Yes.
What was, all right, let me go to I have no idea. After same-sex marriage became legal, same-sex couples now had equal standing with heterosexual couples. All of a sudden, the conclusions of the studies changed. Now there are lots of studies concluding that having two parents of the same sex makes no difference to the healthy development of a child. I personally believe that these studies are adhering to the new rules of political correctness. I have no problem with same-sex couples adopting children who for some reason have been difficult to place. No child should have to grow up in an orphanage or be passed around in foster homes or be in an abusive home. However, if there are both a heterosexual couple and a same-sex couple seeking to adopt the same child, and everything about each couple indicates they would make good parents, I believe that the heterosexual couple should have preference because that is in the best interest of the child. And I realize that doesn't really directly discuss religious agencies, but that's my opinion.
Well, thank you. Are there questions for the speaker? We'll take a question from Hank Fay.
Mr. Chair, the speaker mentions that there were studies about how well children do when they have a mother and a father with their separate contributions, and then the speaker goes on to mention other studies that showed that the LGBTQ parents do well also, and then says, but they were just hewing to the view of the time. I forget the exact words. And I would like to know the differentiation that's being made. Would it not be, would we ask the speaker, would it not be the case that if the studies that showed man and woman hewed to the moment of the time, and the ones that hewed to LGBTQ or the ones that said LGBTQ work are also hewing to the minute of the time, and how does she make the distinction?
I'm not making a distinction. My point was that before the issue of same-sex marriage and adopting children by same-sex couples was even an issue, every study indicated that how important a father is to the children and how important the mother is. My point about political correctness is that nowadays you can find any poll or any study that concludes whatever it is you want it to conclude. And all of a sudden, it's very difficult to find a study. All the studies now, not all the studies, but many studies that are cited now say, oh, it makes no difference, none whatsoever. Why did it make a difference before and now it doesn't make a difference? So my personal opinion is that I think there are obvious differences in what a mother brings to the development of a child and what a father brings. They have, you know, regardless of what is now again conventional wisdom, there are differences in the way men and women emotionally react to different situations. And I believe that that's important in the development of a child to see that.
All right, thank you to our speaker and our questioner. We are now going to move on and have a speech in the negative. Are there any speeches in the negative? Let's see, I see a hand from Sue from Iowa.
Hi. Okay. I speak very passionately. So don't think I'm trying to convince you of what I believe to be true. But if I do, that's wonderful. But that's not why. But I just get so wrapped up in this. I'm a CASA, which is a court-appointed special advocate. I work with broken families all the time. I work with also trying to rescue kids that have been taken into sex trafficking. So I'm in this world all of the time. And I want to start off by saying these conversations are fantastic, but they're very scholarly. They're not down in the trenches reality. Down in the trenches reality is only these cute little babies get adopted. So you can put all the rules that you want to on that baby and people will still fight over it because they're still cute. But just like kittens grow into cats, kids grow into little people. And as they become a person, they begin to have their own personalities, their own ways of being. And because there's no test about being a parent, you can be a parent willy-nilly as long as you can get pregnant or you can impregnate, you can make a baby. So you can make all these babies all over the place and you can litter the nation with all these kids that you're trashing. And that's what's been happening. And if you look at many of the statistics about people that grab a gun later on, you will find that they were traumatized as small children. I firmly believe that we need to look at our whole system of adoption and really evaluate what does that child need to become a productive citizen? What do they need to be strengthened and to be healed and to move forward? And when a child is put up for adoption, something has traumatized that child. And so most kids are traumatized, and you can study RAD, RAD, you can study ACE, all of these alphabet letters as to what these children are now dealing with. I firmly believe that if there is one or two people who meet the qualifications necessary to prepare a child for society and to be able to deal with all of those scars that they have from being traumatized as small children, including infants, then I think they deserve to adopt that child. But
Sue, just letting you know, you have about 30 seconds left, but please continue.
no, sorry. All of these kids that are not being adopted end up in sex trafficking, or they end up committing suicide, or they end up being very, 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 very angry adults. So please, please, please help these kids find homes. Please help these kids find a loving place where they can heal. I'm done.
Thank you. We will take, we'll have a brief minute or two for questions. A question from Rachel Becker.
Hi. So my little daughter Liliana has joined us. Hello.
Hi.
So I really appreciate that the speaker has brought in the perspective of someone who works in this field. I agree that that's been lacking, and would love to hear more. I'm curious, in the speaker's opinion, how one determines whether a given set of people are going to be good parents. I feel like that's such a challenge. Another speaker said that there are obvious ways to tell if someone's going to be good parents. I find that very, very complicated, so I would love to hear the speaker's opinion on that.
Okay, this is a hard question to answer because right now I'm involved in a case where the kids are going to end up going back home, and it's the worst thing that could happen to them. And this happens all the time because parents have rights and kids have none. And when kids are removed from the home, they're removed from the home for a reason. But that's becoming harder and harder to do. Just because you're on drugs doesn't mean you have to be removed. I'm sorry, I forgot the question now. I went so off. Could you quickly ask it again? I'm so sorry.
For a quick re-ask.
My question was how we determine whether people will be appropriate parents.
Nobody has been able to come up with a real firm way to decide whether or not people will be good parents. There are ways to prove yourself, and that is to get a license as a foster parent and then demonstrate the skill sets that you can apply to a child, and then you can end up getting on the adoption list, sometimes for that child, but not usually. Usually it's a different child. But that's about the only way that I know of right now that is even close to being scientifically done. You know, I'm wishing some of these programs where you can get a date because they analyze who you are and analyze who they are and stuff and see if that works. I don't know. There truly is no good answer, but I can recognize a bad parent. I can spot him a mile away.
All right, thank you to our speaker and our questioner. We will now move on and have a speech in the affirmative. Are there speeches in the affirmative? Please raise your Zoom hands for speeches in the affirmative. For a speech, Rachel Becker.
I apologize if I'm talking too much here, but other people are welcome to chime in. I really struggle with this question because I truly believe that homosexual people make amazing parents. And I know homosexual people who make amazing parents. I also strongly believe in the arguments that have been made that people should be free to follow their religious conscience. And I think that's also right. So where does that leave us? I find myself thinking that we should have enough space in society for both. And someone else mentioned this, but I guess it comes down to, I think that instead of trying to force agencies to change their belief system or change their practice, I think that we should be building agencies that will allow for the widest diversity of parents, if that's our belief system. And I believe that for a couple of reasons. One is that it seems like it's always more positive to put energy into creating the world we want than to trying to destroy the world someone else wants. It also seems to me that if an agency feels forced to take on homosexual clients, that they will do a poor job of serving those clients. That if I have a homosexual friend and I know that an agency is only allowing them to come because they feel forced to do it, I don't think that's going to be an ideal environment for that person to adopt in. So I would prefer to send them somewhere where I know they'll be better treated from a genuine place. So that's my thought.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for the speech. We'll take questions. Are there any questions for our speaker? A question from Marjorie Osborne.
I have lost track of which speaker or questioner I'm responding to, but I would like to say that I'm responding to Yuri's emphasis on the fact that according to the way this proposal is written, it's a religious question of how we allow the government to force a religious agency to act against their will. So I'd like to hear thoughts on that, though I really appreciate Sue and others' concerns about what's good for children.
Rachel, feel free to respond to that.
Yeah, I think the question of what is religious conscience is a really interesting one, a really important one. How do you define as a society what are religious rights given the complexity of religion? And how do we define what should be mandated by government? I mean, the libertarian person who spoke first was saying, nothing should be mandated by government. Just about. I think that this also gets super tricky because the church in America was super involved in things like slavery that we have since all rightly come to agree were terrible, terrible wrongs. So there are religious perspectives and religious viewpoints that have done a great deal of harm in our world. So I think the question for me becomes, so is the agency defining this as a religious issue? In this case, yes. And is there enough space in our society to legitimately hold space for the difference and allow people to both live the way that they want to? And I think in this case, yes. I think our society is large enough and diverse enough and resourced enough that we can allow some agencies to do it one way and some agencies to do it another.
For a brief final question, Ron McFarland.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I always get that wrong. Mr. Chair, could you ask the speaker how we could come to a balance without destroying the moral values that we as Christians go by the Bible? How could we support in a positive without going against our moral values that we learn in the Bible? Because we do love children. Where it says this, we can't support the other half. So anyway.
I am so sorry. I couldn't hear the second half of the question. I don't know if the gentleman could repeat it.
Basically, what I'm saying is how can we give support without being demonized ourselves and without going against our moral compass of what we believe through the Bible? I mean, it's a tough one, but you're demonized when you stick up for your values and your morals that you believe in. So
For the brief response.
I agree with the questioner. That is a super tough one. I think that Christians, and I am also Christian, that if we are to live in the most Christian way in the world, that our primary ethic is one of love. And as Galatians says, we seek the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. That said, I recognize the biblical reasons why many people hold a position against homosexuality. I don't personally hold that position. And I know many people that I deeply respect who are very caring, loving people toward homosexual people as well as others who do believe that it's biblically wrong. And so I think that's why this is a very interesting debate, and I hope for the freedom to hold diversity within our country, to have people be able to land on different sides of this one and be respected either way.
Thank you. Jazz hands for our speaker and our questioners. All right, we are now going to take a speech in the affirmative. Are there any speeches for speech in the affirmative? Carolyn Sullins, do I have that right?
You have that right, but I thought that we were giving speeches in the negative at this time, against the.
Oh, my apologies. I may have lost track of where we were. Are we on the negative? Can a whip fill me in?
We are.
Oh, my apologies. Technology.
Okay.
All right, for a speech in the negative, Ms. Sullins, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start just by reflecting on some of the things that Uri has said, and I believe Kathy. And there's an old saying that if you have 3 Jews in the room, you're going to have 4 different opinions. So here's mine, actually, a personal story about adoption and why this issue is so important to me. More than 20 years ago, my husband and I wanted to adopt a child. We went to an agency, and one of the first things we were told was, we only adopt Christians. And I've been experiencing anti-Semitism before, but to me, that was just like a punch in the gut that I was an unfit parent because I was Jewish. And so I can certainly imagine that gay couples, lesbian couples, other couples feeling the same way, being told that they are unfit parents because of who they are. And it's hard while I certainly understand freedom of religion for agencies to practice what they believe and not feel forced by the government. And I certainly understand Rachel's perspective that if any agency is forced to do something they don't believe in, I've seen that attitude so many times, and it's might not have a good outcome. But so I guess there's no easy answer there, but I certainly believe that we really need to look at the best interest of the child. I think that, I can't remember who brought up the point about, well, what if a biological mother gives up her child and wants the agency, wants that child to have a specific type of family? My perspective is, if you do an open adoption, then yes. But you can't just say, well, I'm going to give up my child, never see him or her again, but I dictate that this is the kind of family I want for them. But if it's an open adoption where if it's collaborative, then maybe there can be more of a say in what kind of family would be appropriate. So Again, I have mixed feelings to some extent, but I think of course, it's hard for me personally to separate my personal experience, although mine has a very happy ending. I am now the proud mother of a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, both biological, but I know a lot of families do not have that option. We'll never have that option.
All right. Thank you. We will now take questions. Questions for the speaker. Please raise your Zoom hands. A question from Yuri Vinowitz.
Hi, I'd like to thank the speaker for the speech. So my question to the speaker would be the following, similar to what I'd mentioned before. Is a different speaker before had referenced the roots of the Bill of Rights as is coming from Polish and French philosophy. My understanding, I'm not an expert on the topic, was that it's actually from Scottish philosophers, and the idea was kind of an inverse one, which is that people have rights that governments can't take away. So my question is, it's not so much about, I agree with with a lot of what the other speakers said, that when it comes to government adoption agencies, they in their calculation, it cannot be kind of the religion of the religious beliefs of the one adopting the child. But when it comes to religious agencies, it's not so much whether they're right or wrong, but it's whether the government has the right to mandate to religious agencies in terms of issues of belief. And I could hear, like other speakers said, it's not an issue of belief. My question would just be not.
Hey, Yuri, just letting you know you have a few seconds to wrap up the question.
Thank you. Does the speaker think that the government has the right to tell to dictate to adoption agencies, and where that could lead if they take that as their right?
Yes, thank you, Uri. I understand that, as I said earlier, that there is that tension between having the government dictate what an agency can do, especially a religious agency, and where do you draw the line there? But at the same time, there are some things that we already cannot do. Even if I understand correctly, religious organizations cannot discriminate even when it comes to hiring, although there might be maybe at a church or something that's more specific, but there's still some limits. And the question is, where are those limits? And when it's something as children who desperately need families, especially, when I went through this agency, my husband and I were willing to adopt older children, which is very much in, very, very strong need, and we were still told no. And it just breaks my heart that there were children who would be denied this because that this agency was legally allowed to discriminate.
All right, for a brief final question, Rachel Ernstoff.
Thank you, and thank you to the speaker for sharing her story. I was just curious, some of the other speakers made it seem like it's really easy to just choose a different agency. Basically, like, you're not happy with that one, just go to a different one. And I was wondering, like, what your experience with that was.
Yeah, thank you for asking. At that point, I think we did look briefly elsewhere, and then, just for other personal reasons, things got put on hold. And then not too much longer, I lucky enough, I did get pregnant, and so then the whole adoption question was moot. So, but, and I think that, I know one thing that I have to watch for is making sure that my personal experience doesn't, there's always two sides, and because I just felt so strongly about being discriminated against, does that mean that agencies don't have that right? And it's hard for me to be not biased about this.
All right, thank you to our speaker and our questioners. That having been a speech in the negative, we will now take a speech in the affirmative. Are there speeches in the affirmative? Perhaps a speech from John Allen? I have that right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right, a speech in the affirmative.
Yes. Mr. Chairperson, I'm honored to be able to speak to this topic. And I understand that it is a very, very complicated topic and there are lots of ins and outs. I really understand the need for adoptive parents of good caliber, regardless of the family situation that they're in. And if it's between a choice of sending them to, allowing them to go into child slavery or any kind of slavery, or finding them a good home in same-sex or LGBTQ, I would be for that. But I am a deeply religious person, and for religious reasons, it would be very difficult for me if I had an agency that was based and funded by my religion to be forced, if people came to me with a child, to put that child into adoption with a family that would not be LGBTQ, or that would not be a family that had a father and a mother. I think that, in my opinion, I agree with Yuri. Yuri has a really good solution. In order not to infringe on religious rights and people's right to exercise their religion, the government should not force an agency like a Catholic adoption agency, per se, to give that child to somebody who does not believe the beliefs they have. I think that there probably are enough government-based agencies and other agencies that parents who are looking to adopt should be able to find plenty of places where they can adopt children that will allow them to adopt. In this day and age, I would expect that that's very common, but I don't think the government should be mandating to a church-sponsored agency that they should adopt. They should allow adoption to people that don't follow or practice their basic, deeply religious convictions. Done.
All right. Are there questions for the speaker? Please raise your Zoom hands. Question from Hank Fay.
Yes, Mr. Chair, would you ask the speaker if an adopted child came to you who authorized a religious agency to choose someone only of their own religion and came to you at age 21 and said, what right did you have to choose a parent on the basis of religion for me? What would you say to that child?
Thank you for the question. I have to say that that I guess if the child was old enough to have decided on his own and just randomly chose me as an agency, he might have recourse. But generally, when you have a religious organization that sponsors adoption agencies, the people know that when they go there, and the parents are the ones that are choosing. And it really wouldn't be necessarily the religious agency that's making the choice, but it would be the choice of the parents by going to the agency in the first place.
Thank you. We'll take another question from Cindy Pullman.
Hello. Mr. Chairman, I would like to address the speaker. I have a question. If he makes a distinction between having the right to exercise his own beliefs and trying to have everybody else have those same beliefs, if there's a distinction between personally holding your own beliefs and wanting that to be for you and trying to have everything under your jurisdiction, everyone else follow those same beliefs.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I appreciate the question. No, I believe firmly that people have the right to follow whatever the conscience of their heart is, and that's part of our basic fundamental principles of this founding of this country, that we have a right to believe in who, where, and what, and how we want to. But the government does not have a right to infringe upon those religious beliefs. And I believe that by forcing a religious-based agency to give up an adoption to an LGBTQ or a same-sex marriage that applied is an infringement of those beliefs.
Thank you. Jazz hands for our speakers and our questioners. We will now take a speech in the negative. Are there speeches in the negative? Raise your Zoom hand. For a speech, David Morgenstein?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And my appreciation to everyone, the speakers, the questioners, the attendees. This is a wonderful forum. For me, there are two bright lines that clarify this in my mind, at least. One is there's the freedom of opinion, freedom of attitude, religion. The issue is of action. That's where we draw the line. Freedom, not necessary to act on those views or those religious beliefs. And the other is, I think someone said it earlier, money. When an organization accepts federal funding, they then have to obey important federal anti-discrimination laws that apply to those programs. So I had done just a little reading. Under US federal law, public accommodations may not discriminate. Public accommodations are generally defined as facilities, both public and private, used by the public. Examples including retail stores, rental establishments, and service establishments. Gay and lesbian parents rarely, and this was said, I think by, maybe it was under a question, rarely become parents by accident. This is sort of known widely. Some friends of mine as well, I know this. There's a great deal of intentionality compared with almost 50% of accidental pregnancy rates among heterosexuals. This translates to a much greater commitment on average and more involvement. Someone talked about various research on different sides. Most of the research that I'm aware of indicate that kids of gay parents show few differences in achievement, mental health, social functioning, and other measures. They do just as well, but they may have an advantage of being in a household with open-mindedness, tolerance, and role models for equitable relationships. 60% of gay and lesbian couples adopt across races. Someone was talking before about the hundreds of thousands of kids that are potentially going to end up in foster care situations if they're not adopted. Gay and lesbian couples are much more willing to adopt across race. This is rather important. And more than half of the kids adopted by gays and lesbians had special needs. This is back to the passion and intentionality that these parents have. And I'll just.
David, just letting you know, you have 30 seconds. Feel free to unmute yourself and continue.
I don't know how that happened. I must hit a key. Anyway, Stuart, you would encourage us to add humor into this discussion. I'm struggling with how to do this because to me, this is such a terribly important topic. I have several couple friends who are gay, and they are the most loving, caring, intentional parents. If you take the dollars as an adoption agency, then you have to follow the anti-discrimination rules. And thank you very much.
All right, questions for our speaker. We will take one question from John Kingery.
I'd like to address to the speaker. First of all, I'd like to thank him. I think he had the speaker. I think he had a good, raised some very good points there. How would you feel if one of his same-sex couples that he knows, and I know many too that are good, had a child and were forced to give it up because of family issues or whatever when it was still a young baby, and if the agency were able to give it to a fundamentalist Christian group or fundamentalist Islamic group or something else, where it would be raised under a set of beliefs that couple didn't believe in, should your friends giving up their child have the right to say, in broad terms, where their child should go? Thank you.
I'll thank the questioner for the question. And boy, that's a good one. I don't have a really good answer. I would say, in general, when people, either an individual woman, a couple, reach a point where they need the support of an adoption agency to take care of their child, their decisions they have to make, they're wrenching, they're gut wrenching. And you know, they have to compromise on things that may be important to them. And I would imagine the question will apply to anybody, not just to a gay couple, to anyone who, you know, had beliefs and saw this child whom they may love dearly but cannot be raised by people who have a very, very different view from theirs. So in my mind, it isn't necessarily around this, the LGBT question, but thank you for the question.
All right, thank you to our speaker and our questioner. We are now going to switch over, due to the lateness of the hour, to rapid fire speeches. So we will take speeches. You will have 1 minute and 30 seconds. I will cut you off at 1 minute and let you know that your time's almost up. Feel free to raise your hand for a speech on either side or neither side. So affirmative or negative if you'd like to speak on the topic, or if you don't have a side, please raise your Zoom hand and we will just go rapid fire, no questions, until we're done. So for a speech, Ron McFarland.
Thank you again for this chance to speak. This is a tough topic, and I say this out of love for everyone. LGBT runs fundamentally counter to many people's religious views.
Ron, you're coming in kind of muffled.
Okay. Am I okay now?
Perfect.
Okay. LGBT runs fundamentally counter to many people's religious views. Legalizing it would offend cherished beliefs and further undermine the key role religion plays in my life, especially as a moral bedrock in society. Christianity, even Judaism, Islamic leaders have all spoken out against gay or LGBT adoption. But the LGBT factor cannot be ignored. I would say that what we as Christians would need to do is to start adopting on a huge numbers. And that way we could support the adoption agencies a lot better, because even though I know that children, they need loving homes. I was in an orphanage myself, and it was, and then.
Ron, just letting you know you have 30 seconds left. Unmute yourself and wrap up.
And being from an orphanage myself, I know I would have loved to been adopted. I never was. And it hurts my heart to not have been. So, but as a Christian, I cannot go against my moral principles. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. We will take a speech from Jennifer Maxwell.
Hi, so thanks for all who've shared. I wanted to make a comment about, in listening to all of the questions and speeches tonight, that I've seen a very stark talking past each other on these issues, and I just like kind of wrote out like some things just so I'm not super long-winded. But I kind of noticed like in those who held the negative view of the prompt, that their arguments were more for positive rights of LGBTQ people, and the right to adoption, and the and trying to prove that they would be good parents, where the arguments based on the affirmative were more protections of liberty for religious beliefs and not to disqualify on a rights basis the right to parenthood of LGBTQ people, even though that may align with their religious belief. And so just spanning off of that, I think it's been really helpful for me to hear this conversation, as so many conversations like this,
Jennifer, just letting you know you have 30 seconds left. Please unmute yourself and continue.
So to wrap up, I just wanted to point out that difference of, as we go in our own ways to have this conversation with people, to see where our moral value is arguing from, and to see the other, so we can at least see the platform we're standing on to have the conversation.
Thank you. We will now take a speech from Beth. Beth from Wisconsin.
Oh, I've been, okay, hi. I've been sitting here wondering, oh, can I say something? And I've been on these sessions many times, and I'm speaking now. What comes to my mind through all this is that the Christians have been the ones who have been motivated by their Christian faith to start organizations to help, you know, people, the children, orphans, the poor. And so I would think that there's plenty of room for other people, I don't want to do that. I want to say people of different beliefs to start their own agencies. There's room for that. But recognize that Christianity has been the foundation of the help, right or wrong. That's historical. And they're not the only ones on the block. Other people can start their own and help the children and other needs. So that's my thought.
Thank you. We will now take a speech from Rachel Ernstoff.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say shout out to Jennifer. I really appreciated this sort of like clear distinction between what's going on here. And I had a lot of the same thoughts. There's just one little point that I wanted to bring up, which is, and this is, I think, in response to Rachel Cornfield, who brought up this issue of like, even if we have a law where we force people, agencies to let LGBT people adopt, they're not going to like it and they're not going to do it well. And I think that is a big concern. But one like additional facet of this is that laws actually like serve as signaling forces to society for what our values are. And we saw that that was a big factor after the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, where Republicans and conservatives did not support gay marriage before that decision. And then afterwards, support for gay marriage like skyrocketed. And now like majority of conservatives and Republicans do support it. And so I think that that's an important consideration to take into account as like another thing that this kind of law would do. If we say like you can't discriminate against LGBT parents, I think that would actually change values and make people more tolerant of LGBT raising children. Thank you.
Thank you. For a speech, Malu, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
You got it right. I would like to make just a very short introduction about myself. I'm a member of the LGBTQI community. I was raised Catholic, and in some way, I'm still connected to the Catholic Church, but I'm really more of a secular Buddhist. I agree with the first speaker that stated that under freedom of religion, a private religious agency has the liberty and the right to decide their policies. That's 2020, and I think that is true. But I think we as a society and religious people must respectfully challenge and question via, moments like this, via creating healthy conversations. But I feel we could and should challenge those beliefs of what we interpret from books that were, for example, written in times where women were considered less than animals. An example of questioning and challenging beliefs was shown in 2014 when Pope Francis accepted that evolution and the Big Bang were true.
Malu, just letting you know you have 30 seconds left. Please unmute yourself and continue.
Science also has challenged and questioned themselves. For example, in 1973, the American Psychiatric Association stated that homosexuality was not a mental illness. I just kind of stopped thinking that if my parents would have not questioned their beliefs, I would most likely would have ended up as a statistic of a person that committed suicide. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. For a speech, Jennifer Warren.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say I firmly support the right for LGBTQ couples to adopt, and that I believe in civilized societies, which I like to think we are here in the United States, although sometimes it doesn't feel that way, that civilized societies do not discriminate on grounds of race, creed, gender, or sexuality. And yet the denial of equal rights to gay couples is clear discrimination. So I come down rather strongly in my feeling that they should have the right for that. I think that gay and heterosexual couples deserve the same legal rights to adopt. But one of the things that has come up for me in this debate is that the resolution is religious adoption agencies should not be required to allow LGBTQ couples to adopt children, that they should not be required. Well, I hear all of this about the children, and I'm sort of looking at it from their perspective, that there are so many children that need to be adopted, and that by limiting that, you know, we're going to take LGBTQ couples out of the equation, it limits these homes that I think we've heard good and compelling arguments or.
Jennifer, you've got 30 seconds left. Please unmute and continue.
A good home are good parents, and we're denying those opportunities for families, for the children. And so looking at it sort of from that perspective, there may be more compelling. It may be that the need to place children up for adoption may outweigh the right for them, for religious adoption agencies to be able to pick and choose. And in this case, picking and choosing against LGBTQ. Thank you.
Thank you. For a final speech of the night, brief speech, John Allen.
Thank you for letting me say a few words. I just have to say a couple things. Number one, I really liked one of the speakers, the one that spoke right after me. His points were very valid, and I don't think that caring couples, whether they're same-sex or LGBTQI or plus or whatever it is, all the alphabet, would make any worse parents than heterosexual parents. I don't think that we have a right to discriminate against them for adoption, but I do believe, and the other thought I have, if a religious organization that sponsors an adoption agency is taking government money, then I also agree that they should comply with government mandates. However, if a religious organization is self-sustaining and they choose to place the baby for adoption only within their religion or only within heterosexual couples, I think they should be allowed to do that. And anything other than that is infringement upon their religious beliefs.
All right, thank you, John. That is it for our debate. Thank you so much to everyone who spoke. Because we are still in the debate, because I called the debate to order, parliamentary procedure dictates that we now close the debate. So to do that, could someone briefly unmute themselves and say, Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn.
Second.
Wonderful, and you guys already know what to do. The next step would be for someone to unmute in second. We've had a second, and with that, we are adjourned, but don't go anywhere. Thank you all so much for coming. We're gonna go around just very, very briefly, a couple people raise your hand and then unmute yourself and say one sentence about what you learned here tonight or what you enjoyed. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, one of the things that became clear to me, and I didn't make it clear when I spoke, was how we fail to take the position of the child who can't speak yet.
All right. Other thoughts, things people learned or enjoyed?
I'm just glad that there's a place in our society, Braver Angel sponsors, where people can disagree respectfully and listen to each other and share their views. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to jump in for just a second and thank Ron for opening up and talking about how it feels not to be adopted. I really deeply appreciate that. And I just admire you for your openness. Thank you.
Right. Any other burning comments?
I love these friendly conversations, and I learned so much from them. I do appreciate Braver Angels for putting them on. And I think basically, I don't think that we're that far apart. I think to the issue of not speaking for the child, whether we allow him to be adopted in whatever kind of family, aren't we also speaking for him anyway? Isn't that taking away his rights? That's all I'll say.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. I am now going to pass things over to our whip, Mackenzie, who has a few brief comments for you. But I'd also just like to say thank you all for being such a wonderful group. This was my first time chairing one of these Zoom debates and wielding the gavel. And you are all very, very kind to me, so thank you. And with that, that is it. I don't have anything else for you. Thank you all for coming, and we hope you have a wonderful night and that you'll come back and participate in another Braver Angels debate. Take care.